The room went completely silent. A 350-pound bodyguard was standing face to face with Chuck Norris. He had never lost a fight. Not once. He had thrown professional fighters across rooms, broken wooden doors with his shoulder, and once stopped 3 men with his bare hands. Everyone in the studio knew one thing: nobody touched this man without regretting it. But then he reached out and put his hand on Chuck Norris. What happened next made the entire room freeze. It was a cold evening in Los Angeles. A private television event was being filmed inside a packed studio. The audience had come to watch a special appearance featuring some of Hollywood's biggest action stars. Behind the cameras, security moved constantly, but one man stood out. He was enormous, nearly 6 feet 5 inches tall and weighing close to 350 pounds. His name was Frank. For years, Frank had worked as Clint Eastwood's personal bodyguard. People in Hollywood knew him for 2 things: his size and his record. Frank had never officially lost a physical confrontation. He wasn't a professional boxer. He didn't need to be. His strength alone was enough to make most people back away. He could carry 2 full-grown men at the same time. He could bend heavy metal equipment, and according to the people who worked around him, he had once lifted a man off the ground with one arm and held him there until security arrived. Frank wasn't looking for trouble, but he had one rule: nobody got close to Clint without permission. That night, Clint Eastwood was backstage talking with producers. Then another legendary action star entered the room: Chuck Norris. The atmosphere changed immediately. People recognized him. Some smiled, others whispered, but Frank didn't move. He watched Chuck carefully from across the room. Chuck noticed. He walked over calmly. "Everything okay?" Chuck asked. Frank nodded. "Just doing my job." Chuck smiled. "I respect that." For a moment, everything was peaceful. Then a producer accidentally knocked over a camera stand. Bang! Frank immediately moved. He stepped between Chuck and Clint. The audience could see what was happening. People began whispering. Frank looked directly at Chuck. "You're standing too close." Chuck looked at him, then calmly said, "I don't think I'm causing any trouble." Frank didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer. The cameras were still rolling. The audience became completely silent. Frank's massive frame towered over Chuck. One of the producers whispered, "Someone stop this." But nobody moved. Frank slowly raised his hand. He placed it on Chuck's shoulder. Just one hand. That's all it took. Chuck looked down at Frank's hand, then looked back into his eyes, and said quietly, "That's probably not a good idea." Frank smiled. "Why?" Chuck answered, "Because you don't know what happens next." The audience gasped. Frank tightened his grip. For the first time that evening, Chuck moved. It happened so quickly that most people didn't understand what they had seen. Chuck didn't try to overpower the 350-pound man. He simply stepped sideways. Frank's balance shifted. Chuck grabbed his wrist, turned his body, and redirected Frank's momentum. Boom! Frank hit the padded studio floor. The entire audience screamed, but Frank wasn't hurt. He immediately jumped back up. His expression had completely changed. Now he wasn't testing Chuck. He was serious. Frank charged forward. Chuck waited until the final second, then moved again. Frank flew past him. The crowd erupted. Frank turned around. "How did you do that?" Chuck smiled. "Size helps." Frank stared at him. "Then why am I on the floor?" Chuck answered, "Because size isn't everything." Frank attacked again. This time he tried to grab Chuck around the waist. But Chuck lowered his center of gravity. He twisted. Frank stumbled. Chuck placed one hand against Frank's chest and guided him backward. Frank fell onto a crash mat. Boom! The room went silent again. Nobody had expected it. The giant bodyguard sat on the floor staring at Chuck. Then, something unexpected happened. Frank started laughing. A huge laugh. He stood up and shook his head. "I've never fought anyone like you." Chuck smiled. "I've heard that before." Frank looked toward Clint. "Did you know he could do that?" Clint smiled. "I had a feeling." The audience laughed. Frank looked back at Chuck. "One more." Chuck raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" Frank nodded. This time there was no anger, no ego, just respect. Frank stepped forward. Chuck stepped forward too. They shook hands. The entire audience applauded. Frank leaned closer and whispered, You know, when I touched your shoulder I thought I was testing you. Chuck smiled. And? Frank laughed. I think you were testing me. The audience exploded with laughter. That night, Frank learned something he would never forget. Being the biggest man in the room doesn't automatically make you the most dangerous. Strength can move an object. Size can intimidate a crowd. But experience, timing, discipline, and control can change everything in a single second. Frank had spent years protecting one of Hollywood's toughest legends. But on that night, the man who had never lost finally met someone who didn't need to prove anything. Chuck Norris walked away quietly. No celebration, no victory pose, just a smile. Frank watched him leave, then shook his head and said, I think I'll stick to protecting Clint. Clint laughed. Probably a good idea. The audience erupted one final time. And that's how a 350-pound bodyguard discovered that sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room isn't the biggest one. He's the one who doesn't need to show you what he can do.